We'll turn off. Can you also turn off the chat so that
I will
we
work on
don't
that.
have side conversations?
Right.
Thank you. And my understanding is that Kathleen is welcoming questions. We're in discussion mode. So here is her presentation.
I'm sorry, can I just ask that you turn the chat back on for a moment, so that that's the only way that we can save the existing chat, and warn us when you're going to do that so that we don't lose the opportunity to save it. Thank you.
Okay, it's back on, but Neil, the chat isn't going away. It'll come back at the end of the meeting also.
If I'm here, you bet.
Oh, okay. Are you
Okay,
saved?
Kathleen, would you please introduce yourself? And I just want to say it's been such a pleasure getting to know Kathleen. We did a presentation together at the National League Convention in December, and I've admired her for a long time. And I'm so excited to have Kathleen here to talk about what the league accomplished in St. Louis.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Kathleen Farrell. I am from St. Louis City. I have been in the league for about 35 years, first in Iowa City and now in St. Louis. I've also been president of the Metro League. And now I am the leader of the city unit because I am choosing to do things that I want to do and not to do things that I don't want to do in my old age. So I just wanted to set up, I'm a retired professor and administrator. So the way I'd like to conduct this is I'd like to do sort of chunk by chunk of my discussion and, you know, stop after a couple of slides and see if we've got some discussion going while we're thinking about what we're talking about. If you think that method would work for you, rather than do it all the time or do it all the way through. Let me just say two things. First of all, this campaign was 2019 to 20. Prop D was actually on the ballot in the general election in 2020. We started thinking about it in 2019, so I just wanted to make that correction. Let me also say that my purpose in sharing our experience with you is not to get into the dot and tittle and the technical aspects of approval voting, but rather to tell you about our league's experience with this. And we just had our second election literally on April the 4th with this method. And tomorrow morning, we're going to the swearing in of a whole new brand new board of alderpersons. So that's my purpose, is to tell you the kinds of things that we did and to, you know, express, I think, enthusiasm for the league taking these kinds of risks, to tell you what's happened to us for good or for ill. So I hope that's okay with everybody. We've got lots of folks on here who are technical experts, and that is not my goal tonight. So with that in mind, I think we can go ahead and start. Celeste, if you want to just start our slideshow.
Can you see the slides?
No.
We can see the first one, but it's not advancing.
We're seeing the one that just says Kathleen Farrell.
Yeah, that's not
2018.
mine. So
Yeah.
Okay, let me stop sharing. I probably need to share a different way.
yeah, pull it up, the one I sent you. And while she's doing that, let me just say, first of all, I'm envious that you have personnel in your office. We have 2 part-time folks and we're working really, really hard. So great, good for you. And secondly, I just, this is the best thing that our league has done in the state really in a long, long time. And so I want to share that with you. Great, that is perfect. So
Can you see if I'm advancing? Did you,
Yes.
Yeah, you're advancing, so go back
Okay.
to the first slide. So let me tell you the story of the approval voting in St. Louis City. And let me say at the beginning that the League in St. Louis did not start out being a party member of approval voting. Nobody was a party member of ranked choice voting. We were faced with a practical problem, and our league really became much more activist after the shooting in Ferguson of Michael Brown. We decided at that moment that we needed to really step up our game and to try to make a difference and to try to make government work. And in the city, we knew that we had a serious problem with our leaders having a mandate to lead because our mayors were getting elected by about 30% of the vote, and our older persons were getting elected by about 20% of the vote because we're a one-party town. It's just the Democratic Party, and the real split is between the progressives and various old machines of traditional Democrats. And so nobody had a mandate to lead. We didn't have a professionally run city. We couldn't get anything done. Good candidates were being kept from winning elections because of the number of candidates that would be put up simply to keep people from running. And we knew that our government wasn't working and that our city was in a crisis. So it was in that in mind that we sat down and said, you know, what can we do? And we were looking at St. Louis city government and knowing that it was a disaster. And I started hearing murmurings because we had done what the league doesn't usually do, which is we had participated in the demonstrations in Ferguson. That was really a new venture for us. And so all of a sudden we were connected with a lot of particularly young people who wanted to make a difference. And frankly, we were also connected at that moment with some of the folks who were working for Bernie Sanders and other groups and traditional Black church groups and all kinds of groups who came together during the Ferguson moment. And they were all talking about changing the way we elected St. Louis municipal officials. So out of those new relationships, we were contacted by a group of young folks who said they were interested in exploring approval voting. So could they come talk to us since they had met us on the streets of Ferguson and other places? And could they talk to us about it? And so they came to talk to us. I would say the first time, the fall of 2018, and being the semi-proper league that we are, we're a little bit of a guerrilla league, but the semi-proper league that we were, we said that we needed to study this, and we looked and did a very, very fast but thorough study of alternative voting methods. And about that time, National put in the position that we should explore alternative voting methods. And we looked at our situation, looked at ranked choice and other methods, and decided that approval voting would work best in our situation. So we said, okay, we're going to join. And we got the approval of our board to do that. And we became core members of a coalition of various groups who worked on approval voting. So next slide, Celeste. So here were our problems. As I said, primary winner was always a shoo-in at the general election. Only 10% of voters even bothered to cast ballots in the general election because, you know, the primary decided it. As I said, elected officials lacked a mandate to lead, and vote splitting was rampant. We'd only had one African American mayor, in a town that was prominently African American, and nobody was ever happy with who got elected. Well, not nobody, but lots and lots of people. And this caused, great distrust in city government. Next slide. So, this is the language that was on the ballot. And it was on the November 2020 ballot. So we can leave this here for a few minutes and just tell you that we scrambled. This coalition, first of all, had some seed money for the Center for Election Science, and we are grateful to that, for that. One of their folks flew out to sort of see what we were doing, to see if we were worth investing in, and I think we persuaded them, and they helped us a great deal. But this was a shoestring kind of budget. And the first thing we needed to do was to collect enough signatures to get it on the ballot. We decided we wanted it on the general election ballot because we would have a higher turnout. And we, in essence, started the first of the year in 2020, or the fall of 1919, January of 2020, to give presentations to various community groups and to talk to key individuals about approval voting. And we did that at the same time that we were collecting signatures on the initiative petition. We found that that was a really good way to go because we needed to get people on board as we asked them to sign the petition, and then people would volunteer to also circulate petitions. And this is a really small town. We're only about 300,000 people. I know that's hard to imagine, but and it's a town where if you were in certain circles, lots of people know other people. So we decided that this strategically was the way to go. That the most important thing we could do was to get respected individuals and groups to get on board. And so we had some persuasive work to do, and we did it, and we got this on the ballot. Now, we wanted this to be on the ballot, even though we knew we faced a daunting task that Celeste mentioned, and that is that the first election following this, in which this would be on the ballot, you can see that we said that we wanted it to go into effect 10 days after passage. So that people who were going to run for mayor in March and April of 2021 and run for alderperson would have to meet the new requirements. Let me just tell you a couple things about St. Louis. At this moment, before approval voting, these were partisan elections, and a Republican with maybe 400 votes in the city would have the same standing on the ballot as somebody with tens of thousands of votes as a Democrat. We also put in this measure that we were going to make them nonpartisan. That appealed to many people, but some of the hardline machines were not at all happy about that. We had to deal with that as we went along. But that also meant we would have 4 months before the election to get this up and running and get it through, educate the public, educate candidates, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, next slide. We thought that this was the answer, that we would change to a nonpartisan primary because state law mandated that we have a March primary and then an April election. And so we kept that, but we made it nonpartisan. And then we would have a runoff in the general election. And we thought that that would be a good thing. Now, we knew that there was a lot of vote splitting. People would purposely put up candidates to keep people from winning. But they didn't do it in this case. And we also knew after the March election, in which we not only were educating the public. We were at every polling place. We had given by this time about 70 presentations. We had clocked thousands of hours in canvassing, et cetera, et cetera. But we also did some polling at election polling places to see in March if people liked it, and indeed they did. This was important because nobody paid attention to this. I don't think they thought it was going to pass until the last second. Plus, people were distracted by small things like electing a president, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden, at the very last minute, and I'm talking about 4 to 5 weeks before the election, all of a sudden, elected officials came out of the woodwork and spread all kinds of disinformation. You know the drill. This was all outside money. People in California with the Center of Election Science were trying to tell us what to do. We were racist. We were racist on both sides, et cetera, and we had to combat that very, very quickly. Next slide. So I've gone through some of these kinds of things before, and so you've got them there, but let me just simply say that the League of Women Voters turned out to be the most trusted source in this endeavor. And we had done some polling. The Center for Election Science money had allowed us to do a little polling to see who they trusted, and the League turned out to be the #1 trusted source during this campaign. And so this campaign used that, the League used it, et cetera, et cetera. But as I have said, I just wanted to point out that we reached out to community activists in order to work with them. And this is something that the League, at least here, and I know lots of other places, hasn't done in the past. And we reached out with people who all thought it was wrong and pooled our resources, and we did speak with one voice. We got together and wrote this ordinance together, and we kept reaching out with them. We would make presentations where we had one League person, and then we'd have a community young activist with us. And we would send different folks to different groups. But we made a very important point of doing that. And when I've had people across the country call me about approval voting campaigns, and the first thing I say to them is, tell me what your situation is. Who are the movers and shakers? Who are going to be your opponents? Who do you need to get on board? Who are your significant communities? Who do they trust? Who do they distrust? And sometimes I am dismayed with the fact that they don't know those kinds of things or haven't thought about running a campaign in this way. And I think this was absolutely key to our success. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to show you from that 2021 race what a ballot looked like. And we worked with the Board of Elections to make sure that the ballot that they designed would be absolutely clear. And that was really, really important to us that we do that. So you can see vote for as many names as you approve of in each race, okay? And we were standing outside giving every single voter, before they got this ballot, every single voter a little palm card which explained how approval voting worked. And I think all of those details are really important. Next slide.
When can we ask some questions, Kathleen?
Actually, right as soon as we get done with the election results, and then I'm going to stop.
Okay.
So let me see what's on the next slide. Okay, yeah, this is where I'm going to do this. So in 2021, We elected our first Black female mayor who got a mandated the vote. We had a real mayoral race between two very different candidates. We elected new faces on the board of alderpersons, and these are sort of the lessons that we learned here. Take risks, go places you haven't gone, make important contacts, be passionate, explain how it will strengthen democracy. This is where the league really came in and know what you're talking about. So I thought I would stop right here because this was really the first phase of the campaign, and see what your questions are.
I have a question, but I'm also happy. I get to talk to Kathleen lots. So if somebody else has a question they want to start with, please just speak up.
This is Jan Koch. I'm curious. You said that you kind of got started because a bunch of young people contacted you. Do you have any idea what were they of kind of one group, or were they just completely independent people? And how did they hear about approval voting?
Well, we actually started. We actually would meet with a group called Forward from Ferguson, and there were lots of different people in that group, and there was a group of young people who had formed something called the Young Democrats to be independent from the old machine Democrats, who were looking at alternative voting methods. And I knew several of them quite well from the Ferguson days, and they had done their homework and they had looked at approval voting. And this was a group from Washington University, and they had learned about it, and they had contacted the Center for Election Science. A young man named Tyler Schlinkmeyer was really the informal leader of that group. This was also a group that, coming out of Ferguson, made up its mind that it was going to work through the regular organization. We have a fairly lively socialist Democrats, democratic socialists here. And a number of them were in that group, but they talked to us and talked to others, and they made a decision that they would try to change the structure rather than try to invent a new structure. So that's how they came to us. And immediately after they came to us, they were going to other groups as well. So they were going to the NAACP, they were going to Black Lives Matter, they were going to a whole lot of groups, trying to see if there was interest in this. So that's how that happened.
Kathleen, in the presentation in the panel that you did before the election to adopt approval voting, I remember that one of the other panelists said that they had first considered instant runoff ranked voting, but they rejected that. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah, they did. And there were a number of considerations. And the first one was, frankly, our machines wouldn't deal with, our election machinery wouldn't deal with ranked choice voting. And some people say that that's the only reason we didn't do it. And that isn't the truth, actually, because the COVID money was starting to appear. And we also did it for two other important reasons. Number one, the simplicity of it. And we thought that that would work much better in our population. And we had done some polling to try to figure out what our community thought about it. And they wanted a simple and straightforward method. In that polling, we did some comparisons with various voting methods, including ranked choice voting. And as you all know, ranked choice voting advocates are very active and aggressive, and they had been busy in our communities talking to us about this. And let me tell you the third thing. The third thing was transparency. And we have had a lot of voter fraud in our community, not the kind that right-wing folks talk about, but we'd had various machines who would go to senior centers and help them fill out their absentee ballots. And in essence, you'd see the same signature on all of them, et cetera, et cetera. People were very wary. They wanted a system that was totally transparent, and they thought that approval voting would be more transparent. So that's how we made that decision. Part of it was practical about the election machinery, but we also, tried to figure out what people really wanted, and that's how we came to it. Other
Neil?
questions?
Neil, you have your hand up, but let's let Gary ask since he hasn't said much yet.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't have a hand to raise for some reason in my system. But on your, where you showed the ballot, so if they really liked somebody and somebody was okay, they had no way to indicate a preference or that there was a difference. They would just vote for anybody that's okay, even if some of them they absolutely liked some of them and some of them was okay, I'll accept that one.
No, I will tell you that when we did a statistical analysis, which we did immediately, a couple of days after the election, Gary, we found out that the majority of voters, and I will be happy to send you another slideshow with all of these statistics, that 62% of people voted for at least two candidates. And one of the things that we learned by talking to people at the polling places was why they did that. Now, some of the candidates told them only to vote for one. Some people decided they would only vote for one because they thought then that they would have a better chance of winning. But in about half the races, people said, there's 2 or 3 people running in here who I think have decent ideas. And some of them had similar platforms. And they didn't want to try to worry about who was going to be a stealth candidate or a Trojan horse candidate and go through all of that thinking, and they felt freed up by this.
Yeah, I'd like to see the statistics that you got. That would be very interesting.
Yep. And we're in the process of putting them together now.
Okay.
After this election. So.
All right, thanks.
Neil, you had a question?
Neil?
Yeah, I mean, first, a quick point. Sorry to take time to bring it up, but since I can't ask in chat, I can't turn video back on, which I like to do when I'm talking because it's disabled by the host. But my question is this a good time for you to provide some insights on the Seattle situation? Or are you going to come back to that later, or when should we bring that up?
Well, Neil, I could bring that up, and I was thinking, I think you and I talked about this in Denver a little bit.
Well, more has happened since then. So
yes, more has happened since then.
It's such a different situation where in Seattle it was the league claiming that approval voting was racist and not moving forward with it, despite the fact that ranked choice will take many years to implement and so on.
I can tell you, and I was asked to work with them a little bit. And I tried to help them. I think that, first of all, they didn't approach the league early at all. And I think that's key. I think one of the things that we did was that we talked to, before we ever put the language together, we talked to key constituents. Knowing what I know about Seattle, I would have known that ranked choice very popular in Seattle, not only among individual citizens, but also among key groups. And in that league, there were some members there who had been active in that movement. The other thing is that they weren't approached. And finally, when the league called me and said, what should we do? I said, because, you know, they were being asked to circulate petitions. I said, you all need to meet. You need to draw up your situation as it exists, and you need to figure out what is best for you to work for. Now, I was very sorry that some of the things happened that did, but I will tell you frankly, and before Aaron Hamlin left, I wrote him a very long note about what I thought about this. And I think you really do need to do a very good job up front of honestly and seriously drawing up the political situation that you have in the community that you are targeting and figure it out. For example, they should have known that in the Seattle system, it is possible for the King County Board of Commissioners, or whatever you call them, to put two questions on the ballot. Do you want to have a different election system? And do you want ranked choice? That got thrown on at the last moment. That
I don't
is,
know if everybody knows what's going on here. In Seattle, there was an election in November that started off being just, do you want to change from plurality to top two approval voting in the primary like Kathleen has in St. Louis? And then after that got on via petition, the city council said, or the county commission, whatever, said, oh, we should add a second choice, give voters a second choice. And so it barely passed to change from plurality to a better voting method. And then in the second question, which of these two do you want? The bottoms up RCV or the approval bottoms up RCV won with about 70+%.
yeah.
Versus
And I think
22.
what I'm trying to tell all of you as a league, and you're taking this very seriously, but also other people who are working on these things, you really need to work hard in the beginning. You need to understand very clearly what the environment is. That's the legal environment. That's the Board of Elections environment. That's the key players environment. There are a lot of key players in ranked choice voting in King County in Seattle. You need to do the work to understand your own community, okay? And you need to talk to these people before you start collecting signatures and involve them in the process. You don't go to them with a week ahead of time or 2 weeks and say, oh, endorse this, okay? That's wrong. And you need to be embedded enough in your community and not just rely on political activity by social media, okay? You need to know who the people are and you need to talk to them and they need to trust you to make a case.
That's
I
so well
asked
said. Thank
multiple
you.
times to folks, what problem are you trying to solve? And how will this be the best way to solve it? And I could not get a good answer. Okay, I couldn't get a good answer. I'm just saying, and I thought these were very decent people who had good intentions. I really do think that that's the kind of work that you need to do up front and do it very carefully. So that's my answer, and I don't know what you think about that answer, but that's
Oh,
what
that's a great answer.
You have to do it. I know it's hard. I know it isn't sexy. I know, but I think we just jump into things and then just say, you know, this makes perfect sense, and say we're going to run a social media campaign and it's all going to work out. And that was not the case in St. Louis.
Kathleen, I have, actually, Deborah has a question. Why don't you go ahead and talk, Deborah? My question has not been asked yet, so I still have a question to ask you.
Okay,
And I also
hi, Deborah.
I also wanted to say in response to Gary, who was concerned about not being able to differentiate between candidates in terms of support. the good thing about this is that this was a 2-winner primary. So
Right.
2 people were going to win. So it's less critical to like them both have both of them be your favorite, which is hard to do.
Right.
But you can still vote for 2. Okay, sorry, Deborah.
My question was just, do you think it's easier to do these kinds of changes, structural electoral changes, at the local level before you try and do them at the state level?
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And, we're facing that now. And I will say in full disclosure, the league has not signed on yet to the Missouri campaign, which is starting to form to have statewide officials elected through approval voting. We haven't signed on yet.
And that would be the state league that would sign on, not.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. If you got your question answered, Deborah, I'd like to ask mine. We just had a I guess they call it a municipal election in Denver, 17 candidates.
Yes.
And if somebody won a majority of the votes, then the election is over for that position. But not surprisingly, nobody won a majority of votes in the mayoral contest because there were 16 active candidates. And so there will be a runoff in June, which is, it used to be, we had the election, Denver had the election in May with a runoff in June, so about 1 month later. But a problem has come up, which is that the Denver Elections Office and county clerks across the state need more time now to send ballots out to the UOCAVA, the Uniformed and Overseas Voters. So when they were talking about how to improve or fix the election system in Denver, they said they decided not to adopt any better voting method, and instead they said, we'll just have our election, our regular municipal election a month earlier, so that we'll have 2 months before the runoff. Now you just had your general election in April, you had your primary in March. I guess that can't happen in Denver. I don't know if you have a solution that you can think of, or maybe.
Well, I think the solution is, and I think the solution is that the league and whoever else needs to be in touch with the local election folks. I know that voters don't like to have the rules of the game changed in the middle of the game. I know that. And I've been trying to think about the Denver election and how that can get changed. But other than that, I don't really have much to say about it. I wanted to ask you, did those candidates have to collect signatures to get on the ballot?
Not very many.
Okay, well, I think they should have to collect a few more, and because that requires them then to get support. And I think you might have a very different kind of system. But I want to get through the next section, Celeste, because I want to respect all of your time.
Okay, the other thing I want to say about the Denver election that was different is that this was the first time they had a fair campaign practices,
Yeah.
campaign financing. So a lot more people took advantage of it because of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So we had a mission. We had very clear and discrete tasks. We ran, and I ran a speakers bureau, and I had about 15 to 17 people lined up who I could send to various groups. We contacted significant groups. We contacted all the neighborhood associations and wards and lent our services. Most of the time they were accepted. And you need to have a very clear campaign plan. And I think it needs to include what I call shoe leather politics, not just social media, but shoe leather politics with significant constituencies in, as Deborah asked about, in the local campaign that you're trying to do. And I would urge that you try to do local campaigns first. So I will tell you that our membership in the city of St. Louis tripled within a year as people saw us doing this work, but it also grew in the county. We also have younger members and new members. My city unit is now almost 50% African American. I now have about 20% of my members now are under the age of 30. Now, whether or not they'll stay, I don't know. But because they saw us doing something and they saw us doing a good job. You need to be prepared for significant media exposure, and the league doesn't always work well with this. One thing I would say is that you've got to find out from your league. You've got to say, what do we need permission for? What don't we need permission for? And when the nightly news says, I want to call you in an hour, you need to be ready to go. So you need to set up those kinds of things. You need to protect the league's credibility and reputation, and that means not being too friendly, but fair to everybody. And also to know, as we're going to talk about here in a second, you're in this for the long haul. It doesn't end the day after the election. Okay, Celeste. Next slide. Okay, the long haul. Okay. League was a key advocate then in another reform method. We thought, gosh, this worked out pretty well. What else is wrong? And it just so happened that 10 years ago, we had voted in the city to reduce wards from 28 to 14. And we were having a redistricting thing. And so we jumped on the bandwagon and got involved to make that transparent. And then we were hit with almost immediately the Board of Aldermen introducing legislation to get rid of approval voting. And BOA is the Board of Aldermen. So what the first thing we did was we contacted all those members, had meetings with them, and urged them, quote unquote, not to overturn the vote of the people, and said, you really want to do this? It passed by 70%. You really want to do this? And then we became a key partner in a coalition to pass an ethics package, a conflict of interest package, because our older persons were not required to recuse themselves, if you could believe this, on votes in where the issue in which they had a personal financial interest. It's unbelievable. They didn't have to do that. There was all kinds of graft and bribes going on. We also said that in this package, this ethics package, if you want to change the election system, you're going to have to go back to a vote of the people. Okay. And that was part of it. So you need to protect it. And in April 2022, PRAC-R passed across all wards, 70%. Okay. Even though the powers that be, 3/4 of the older person were against it. Okay. So we were out there saying, we're in this for the long haul. We're not just interested in approval voting. We want to make the city better. Again, a lot of work, but we had built a really good coalition. Not everybody stayed on. New people jumped on, but we got that done. Next slide. Okay, so reform brings change. And let me just tell you, lots of this was a surprise. 3 alderpersons resigned when Prop R passed because they had conflict of interest problems. One of them was a state lobbyist. One of them was a real estate lawyer who didn't do anything except represent bad developers who wanted tips from the city. He would even go into the city meetings with these people, if you can imagine that. Okay. And a third one, in essence, made sure that the right people got certain contracts with the city. So they had big conflict of interest problems, and they simply said, we can't make a living. They were very angry and they quit. And we had to have special elections. The second thing that happened was the FBI was investigating 3 alderpersons for fraud and payoffs. And also fraud and payoffs during the redistricting process, which we suspected. And we went to every single redistricting meeting bringing up these things. And one of them was the president of the Board of Aldermen. And I will simply say, as sort of the league leader of this, I debated the president of the Board of Aldermen 3 times for a full hour. And I must say that the league cleaned their clock pretty well. But the FBI was investigating them. Then the alderpersons then, who didn't like any of this, sued the city, quote unquote, because it had passed, so they wanted the city to get rid of it, and the Prop R Core Committee as persons who had, quote unquote, conspired to deprive them of their free speech, of their right to legislate, had damaged their reputations, et cetera, including 2 league members, including me. So I was personally served with a summons. We got a free lawyer from our fine coalition. And so we didn't expect that. But again, you have to remember you're in there for the long haul. And as I tell my people, we're playing at the big person's table now. And so you need to know a lot. You need to be careful. But because of the care we had taken at the beginning, you know, all of these pieces fell into place. I'll just finish this slide, Maud, and then go to questions about this. Then, 1 week after we received our personal summons, 3 alderpersons were indicted by the feds. They resigned, and they are all 3 of them now in federal prison. Okay? In the meantime, candidates were lining up for the spring 2023 city elections. Okay? So all of this very much affected who we elected in the last 2 weeks to be the new board of alderpersons. So we had redrawn ward lines. We had gone from 28 alderpersons and the chair of the board of aldermen to 14 and the chair of the board of aldermen. We had all these new rules in place, and then we had our second election. And I'm going to stop there to answer your question. Okay, Maud, I think.
So thanks, Kathleen. This is fascinating. Thank you much for sharing with us. The 3 alderpersons who resigned because of conflict of interest requirements, are those the same ones the FBI put in?
No.
So you lost, so 3 resigned and then another 3 went to prison?
Yes.
Oh, what a great board you had.
Oh, yes. I mean, it was fascinating. And, you know, we had 3 special elections because election law required them to be replaced within 30 days. So the league had to educate the public, you know, about all kinds of things. And we also learned the flaws we had in the proposition that need to be fixed. And I'm going to talk about that at the end. There are some things that we need to fix in the approval voting legislation. And I'm going to talk about that at the end. But all of this happened between April and they were indicted and they were in jail by December. Okay. So all 3 of them are in, as we call it, well, some of us call it, you know, Fed, Med, but anyway, they're all residing now in 3 different states in federal prison. And we had a lot of people all of a sudden say, okay, I'm going to run. Okay. Including 2 of our league members, and both were young people. One lost in the first round, and one just got elected against all odds and will be sworn in tomorrow morning.
So Kathleen, you had, in these special elections, you had a 2-round situation also where you had, I mean, you said you had only 30 days, but within that 30 days, you had both the approval voting primary and the general special election.
No, actually, that is not true. Some people went to court and said we don't have 2 rounds for a special election to fill a vacancy, and so there was only 1 round there. There were 2 rounds to elect a new president of the Board of Aldermen, because that fell under another election law. And I'd be happy to send all of that to you. I didn't want to complicate this too much. We also passed 2 weeks ago a charter revision process, and we now know that there are some very specific kinds of things that we need to write into the charter to change some of this, and we are working to do so, and I will talk about that in a minute.
Time to move on.
Yeah, anybody else have any questions? And I'd be happy to send, I don't know, Neil, if I ever sent you a copy of that lawsuit, but I did send it to Celeste, and it's very interesting. And the league got attacked a lot. You know, we were communists. We were in a secret plot to elect certain people to the Board of Alderpersons. All of this stuff happened. I'm just saying you got to be ready for it. And because this is, you know, major leagues, not minor leagues. And we made some mistakes. And some of the mistakes were not to, you know, not to spell out enough in this ballot proposition. So. Okay, so this is the new St. Louis government. Round 1, 40 candidates and new faces. And Gary, this goes to your question. The turnout was low. We thought 12.64%. It's usually about, in the Democratic primary, because that was the only election going, it was usually about 16%. But we had all kinds of new faces running in this first round, and we think that the turnout will continue to increase. However, in round 2, there were new faces and a new majority of reform candidates. The turnout across the city was 18.1%. However, there were 2 uncontested races, and in those wards, the turnout was very low, and in the contested races, the turnout was very high, between 25 to 30 something percent. And so these numbers I think are deceiving. 18.10% is much higher. Usually a general election would be 10%. Which is too bad, because the school board candidates are elected in the general election and ballot propositions are on it. So it was double that, and in highly contested races, meaning, you know, that they started out with 3 to 5 candidates, or you had very different people running, which was encouraged by the first round. We had much higher turnout. And the Charter Commission proposition passed. This is very important because we have not had a charter revision since 1947. And
So this is setting up a commission to write a new charter or to make revisions to the charter. It's not actually changing the charter. Is that correct?
it is to revise the charter line by line. It is a public, transparent citizens commission. The Board of Alderpersons cannot vote down what they do. The public has to vote on it. And people are checked to serve on it. They apply, they are vetted by lawyers also for conflicts of interest, et cetera, et cetera. And this was also something we were pushing, because not only do we need to seal approval voting, but we need to fix some things about it. For example, if you've got a primary and a general, okay, and state law mandates that, and in the state of Missouri, unlike Colorado, we're like Texas. That's not going to happen in my state. But what we can say is when you only have 2 candidates, you only have 1 round, okay? All the evidence that we have says that more and more candidates are going to run because they see this as very encouraging to them. But we had to wage a get out the vote and a public education campaign, not only on the Charter Commission, which required 61% to pass, but we also had to remind people about what approval voting was, because it had been 2 years and a lot of things have happened. And so we sent out 5,000 postcards to the lowest turnout precincts that had contested races. And we did that. And we also worked with various groups, primarily the neighborhood associations who canvassed. So that's what we did there.
Another reason for the league to be involved with municipal elections is that in Colorado, they're nonpartisan. And
Yep.
if you start getting involved in partisan, if you,
Right.
you know, the statewide ones, then there may be partisan accusations thrown, even though they got
Oh,
thrown at you, it wasn't partisan. It says here round 1 and round 2. Is that the new name, or is it still called primary and general?
That was primary and general. But
So
I
if
called
the
them that.
charter, if the charter changes so that there are only 2 candidates, you only have 1 round, would that be round 2 or would that be round 1?
That would be that we're sitting down and talking to various people about. Again, we're trying to get a consensus not only from legal experts but from the core committee about, you know, what they think is best. And but we are leaning strongly toward having those candidates be in the general election, simply so that people don't stay home and not vote for school board. But we're not done with this yet. And
Right.
we know that we're going to have over the next 2 years the opportunity to make those decisions.
The Colorado Springs League is involved in a lawsuit to have Colorado Springs change their elections from April to November. So that's another thing
Yeah.
that's happening. And if you know, if Denver, say, were to consider approval voting, they right now can be elected in the first round if you get a majority of the vote. And
Right.
it would have to be changed if we were to have the first election be approval voting. It would have to be if you get a majority support. And I don't know if we have time today to show election results would show the majority support that St. Louis has. Anyway,
And
Did somebody else-
I'm not trying to dodge the question. What I'm trying to tell you is one of the beauties of this is that we're now going to work with the Charter Commission and have a seat at the table and to work out, you know, and be in the part that deals with elections and work out what is best and then have the people vote on it. So I'm not trying to dodge your question, but I'm also trying to respect the collaborative way that we did this. And I
Right.
think that it's very unique but you know, it's not easy. It's messy. It's a lot easier just to dictate what other people should do. So I think Neil has had his hand up for a while.
I just want to say one more announcement sort of thing. This town of Erie is going to this month send its draft charter, because it wants to become a home rule city, to their town of trustees to put on the ballot. And once again, I think they only can not put some things on the ballot if they're illegal, but otherwise they have to put it on the ballot. They don't have a choice.
Well, I'll simply say that my city is facing all kinds of problems right now. The state is trying to take over our police department. They are trying to remove our prosecuting attorney, Kim Gardner, if you want to read about that. We just changed to new wards. And one of the things, and so we need to proceed carefully. And we've got a little bit of exhaustion going on here. In terms of the people. And so we want to do it right. And this week we've got meetings set up with starting with the Board of Election folks and get their sense of this in terms of the 2 rounds and what went right and what didn't go right. We're meeting with lawyers, we're meeting with our partners, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to be part of the general Charter Commission process. And what we want to do is to fill in the blanks now that we have learned what we have learned. And we didn't, everything was not perfect. But you do tinker with legislation in the world as you go along. And I know that that's uncomfortable kind of thought, but it's true. And, there we have it. So Maude, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Kathleen. The Portland, Oregon League was very active. Do you know about that?
Yeah,
Are
a
you
little
in
bit.
contact? Are you in contact with them? Would you like to be put in contact?
Yeah, I would. I
Okay.
learned about that a couple of years ago, but I haven't been in contact with them. Right now, I'm in a lot of contact with the folks in Texas who are considering approval voting. So,
Okay, yeah. This Portland was about how the city was governed rather than about the election,
Yeah.
rather than as much about the election process. I think they may have changed the election, maybe gone to districts rather than everyone at large. But Celeste, if you'll share Kathleen's contact info with me, I'll do an email introduction with
Sure.
Portland, Oregon's president. I'd be happy to get you two in touch.
Portland just adopted proportional ranked choice voting.
That I think was not in the charter.
yeah,
I
and
think
so
that
they're
was-
going to run into a problem. But I'm saying, when I say you're in it for the long haul, it's not just winning the election and dealing with the Board of Elections. You've got to do this piece by piece by piece. And we did not have a Board of Alderpersons who even changed the charter in 2020 after the people voted in approval voting. They refused to do it. So I'm just saying, you've got to go step by step by step. Now, Neil, you've had your hand up again, I think.
Hi, thanks. This is just, you're such a great font of experience and advice. I don't know if this is what Celeste is thinking you might be getting to in the future, but if not, this whole question of runoffs and approval voting and percent and so on is you have about the only great experience on this around. So can you talk about perceived need and actual need for runoffs? How many of the elections, of the first round or primary or whatever you're calling them, actually had someone with over 50%, in which perhaps people would think that was enough? I guess what you're saying is that you might in a charter propose to change it like from a 2-round system to an initial election with a runoff if needed in a separately scheduled election. Anyway, just what's your experience with how many people actually get 50%?
Okay, we had 15 races if you include the president of the Board of Aldermen. 2 of those races were non-contested, including the Board of Alderpersons, who is a very progressive young woman who was part of these reform campaigns, who would have never had a shot, I think, unless these indictments had gone down and convictions had gone down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She was uncontested, and one of the people who sued me ran against her, and they had 2 rounds. They ran against each other twice in the fall. Because again, we were bounded by state law that says you have to fill a vacant post within a certain amount of time. They ran against each other twice. There were only 2 candidates. He lost squarely. There was another race in which an older person was uncontested, okay, but he appeared on the ballot twice. There was never any election, any race except for one, where a candidate in the primary election got 50% of the vote. There was only one. And I will tell you that a person from the primary who was in 3rd place, closely, but in 3rd place, won the general election. Okay. So there was only one case in which somebody had 50% of the vote in the primary election.
And you
And
had
all of this
with
deals with
with more than 3 candidates in which it was narrowed to
2.
3, and the third of those 3 won the general.
No, in the first, you know what, I misspoke. There was a 6-vote difference between, and it was broken by provisional ballots. This is what happens when you drive 750 miles and get home and you're an old lady, you lose your mind. I apologize.
You're doing great.
There were 6 votes. They were settled by provisional ballots. So the young person who was 3rd until we brought in those provisional ballots then became clinging to 2nd place, and he ended up winning the whole thing. And in the first round, the person who was number 1, you know, had a clear win, but not 50%. So it was very interesting. And actually, that's the young person, a young gentleman named Michael Browning, who became a league member during all of this and who worked extremely hard on both Prop T and Prop R. He was one of those young people that did it. And I think, you know, I am a fan of short elections between a primary and a general, frankly, particularly in municipal elections. And we had a good, healthy campaign. I think it was enough time and not too much time. If you get too much time, I think in a city like St. Louis, you get way too much money that starts floating around, and there we have it. So, but yeah, it was interesting in that way. Anybody else?
We've hit the 8 p.m. mark, but
Yeah.
I wanted you to finish. If people
Yeah.
need to leave, of course, this is being recorded and you can,
And I'll finish pretty fast.
okay. Is it time to go to the next slide?
Yes, it is. And I think we're almost to the end. So, okay. The benefits, and this is the last slide. I will tell you that, you know, it's been a very depressing set of years, particularly if you live in a state like Missouri. But we are now optimistic about the city's future. We can see a better government. Our city is so unprofessional that not a single alderperson had a single professional staff. There were 2 secretaries who took phone messages for them, and that was it. There were no policy advisors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that is beginning to change. And they've already gotten a pay raise. We've already put in staff positions. So starting with these elected new ones, we're marching on. The league benefits were huge. Now, we hope to keep it up, because once you get a seat at the table, you got to keep showing up. You know, that's the problem. And you've got to keep in touch with all these people, particularly in a town like St. Louis. And we have a very, very racially divided town, okay? As some of you may know. Some people say it's the most racist and segregated city in America. One of the big benefits that came out of that was that we were able to cross some of those bridges. And so membership increased, but younger membership increased, and communities of color began to trust us. Not about everything, okay, but about a lot of things. Partnerships increased. You cannot do everything by itself. Now, let me tell you, this isn't easy, because I know the league way is very important, and you need to think about the league way. You need to think about the process you have to go through even to get a letter of the editor approved. And you need to think about how you do studies. I'm not saying don't do them, okay? But you need to think about it, and you need to work with people, not for people, and go in, because not everybody does business the way the league does. And you know, some of the way we do things aren't the best ways. And, you know, we've changed some of our practices, not, you know, the league structured stuff, but some of the way we do business. Gifts and grants increased, money came in because they saw us doing something. And influence has increased tremendously. I can now say that when I go tomorrow morning, every single older person will know my face. Three of them don't like me at all, but I'm going to congratulate them after they're sworn in. And your influence increases, and they think the league is a good source. They're trustworthy. They're a competent and dependable partner. And we can do other things. New opportunities and new work. Now we've got the Charter Commission. We have other things. So my bottom line is take the risk with your league. It makes a difference. But make sure you do your homework. Make sure you do it right. Okay? Know that you can't do everything yourself. And that's the bottom line for me, I think. I don't think there's a chance at all that approval voting is going to get yanked in the city of St. Louis. And I don't think that the state of Missouri, you know, cares enough about what goes on in St. Louis. They'd like to sort of keep us in a prison away from them and the rest of the state. But I think now we can talk about police reform in a much more meaningful way. We can talk about other things. And now people who are working on reproductive choice and other things are contacting us saying, boy, we watched what you did. And if we're going to have a campaign, we want you to be part of it. So be careful what you ask for. But I think that that's what the league is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a force for democracy. Yes, Neil.
I just thoughts on the statewide measure. I know you said you haven't taken a position. Do you want to say anything about it, or?
Yeah, I could say something about that. Benjamin Singer, who is head of Show Me Integrity, who worked with the Center for Election Science, is starting to, I mean, he's formed an organization. They have not come and talked to the league yet. The league has the state league has its meeting on May the 6th. I think we're going to set up a study committee at the state and look at it. We've got a little bit of time. I am not sure that I think it, I mean, I'm just going to say this and I'll probably be run out of the room, but I'm not sure myself as a person that it's right for the state or that it can pass. That people really want it. And I need to see that. I need to work on that evidence first before I jump in there. I would really rather do St. Louis County next or something like that and build that way. But I don't know. I'm going to follow my own instincts and try to see what happens.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry if I was a little bit obtuse or unclear. I hope I wasn't. I tried to pick and choose and throw these last slides together pretty fast about the unique things that I can contribute, and to admit my ignorance, because you have so many good experts in your group.
Well, I wish you could come to all our meetings. You're welcome to.
Yeah, I'd be
I-
happy
I
to do
highly-
that from time to time, but I think that these are the kinds of things that, and I have been following other kinds of races or campaigns across the country, and we've had lots of people contact us. And I think they could learn some things from us about, you know, mistakes not to make and how to push this alternative election systems. The bottom line is not to be a partisan for this or that or the next thing. The bottom line is making elections work better and encouraging more participation from candidates to people, and to not lock yourself into one or the other. I must admit that I do at this point favor approval voting, but it's because of transparency and other kinds of things. But I think that different situations call for different alternative methods.
I want to strongly recommend this Prop D discussion that's on the screen right now. I also sent it out in the email for this meeting. And Kathleen, you said transparency is a big reason that you support approval voting. Can you elaborate on what you mean by transparency?
Transparency in terms of counting votes. And I guess I have been, and people now wanting to see the vote count in their local board of elections and all the stuff that's going on across the country. And I am not living in the most sophisticated community or state at all. And I know that people are very, very, if they're wary about ranked choice voting, and this is not, you know, I'm talking about a regular person. One of the things that they are most wary about is being able to watch the process, watch the count. And that's one of the things that I was most concerned with. And so that is an argument that I have come to think more and more about. Now, those of you who are very technical experts, good technical experts on ranked choice voting, might be able to figure out how to do that. I was not able to figure out how to do that in my community. And so that's what I would say about that.
Thank you so much. Applause. Wonderful discussion here.
Yeah.
Um,
And I don't want to scare you all, although I have to tell you, I had a number of sleepless nights along the way. Having a sheriff, you know, serve me with a summons when my sister, a Trumper, was visiting me wasn't exactly pleasant, and all that goes along. But I do want to emphasize that if you want to play, you want to really make a difference, you have to be prepared, and you have to be in it for the long haul. And I think that's what always attracted me to the league, is that the league was really in it for the long haul, but you got to know what that's about. And that's what I would say. And I thank you for including me.
Thank you.
we will be in touch with you. It's been wonderful getting to know you, and I wrote down various action items and things to ask you for, and contacts to make with you, and not Maud, for instance. I'm going to go ahead and finish this meeting up, I think, so that we can all leave. This was the last thing that you did. I'm going backwards for a second because I just want to, oh, never mind. We'll talk about voluntary voting systems. We'll find out what the rules are for national participation. So we have heard from Kathleen that you need to do your homework. And we've also heard municipal level is the best place to work. And we've also heard that from Dwight Shellman, who works in the Secretary of State's office. At least that's his opinion. He's not speaking on behalf of the Secretary of State's office. Meanwhile, we have talked about wanting to work on state and federal elections. So we may want to revisit that. People speak up if there's anything you want to say about what I just said about possible paths for us to take. And then I'll talk about the next meeting. Does anybody disagree? Is anybody still, should we still consider, should we say, let's think about municipal? And if we think about municipal, I mean, maybe the one to think about is Denver, because that's the big city that had a big election that made the news recently.
Yep. I also say to you, look, you need to have some success. And people need to see that it's working. And secondly, you need to have a good, healthy sense of what you can accomplish. And that's the reason I think that and I also think at the local level, it makes an immediately the most difference. And so that's the reason I caution you about jumping into the state without doing local fixes that need done, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm going to go ahead and mark May 15th for our next meeting. I'm going to stop sharing and talk about the next meeting. Jen, do you want to mention the idea that you?
Yeah, so some of you have heard me mention Moon Duchin, who's a math professor at Tufts University and the head of the MGGG redistricting lab. So I think, she's best known in the world of mathematical analysis of redistricting, and she's done a lot of expert witness work and in that area. But she also has done some work in alternative voting methods, particularly regarding single transferable vote and other forms of ranked choice. She's done some really interesting academic work showing that, single transferable vote, AKA proportional ranked choice voting, can be very effective at improving minority representation. So anyway, I had a visit with her recently, and she expressed some interest in possibly coming to talk to us. And she gives great talks, and I really respect her insight. And so if this group would be interested in having her come talk, I would like to invite her.
I'd say yes.
Yeah.
Okay. There being no objection, I will ask her if she's available for the next meeting.
She's a hot shot in the world of redistricting. I mean, and she's basically started a school to train people to testify in court cases, or it's very interesting. And Jen attended that school. And another interesting thing about her is that she is a dual citizen in France. So she has experienced both French elections and American elections. And she also lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which uses proportional ranked choice voting. So lots of angles of interest there. So if people are up for that, we'll ask her to come to the May 15th meeting. I don't know if that will work for her. I've also been in touch with a woman in Amarillo, Texas, whose husband worked on cumulative voting, which I know is not as good as any of these proportional methods. But in terms of talking about a campaign to get a new method, I thought she might be a person, and I need to get back in touch with her. She didn't reply to my last email, so. So that's a second possibility. May 15th is before the runoff election. Runoff elections are not in Denver. Runoff elections are not as interesting as multi-candidate elections. But the topic will probably still be of interest to people. So we can continue that discussion too. Anything else, Maude?
On a small note, Jeff was an elections judge for the Denver primary, and I'm guessing will be for the runoff, but I don't know. For the first Denver mayoral election.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. You're welcome, all of you who live in Denver.
Indeed. Thank you.
It's always good to have somebody on the ground who's seen the system at work, and that's part of doing the homework that Kathleen was talking about. So, anything else before we adjourn for today? Sorry to keep people over. I think it was worth it.
I guess I don't know how much you just briefly covered the charter as part of the home rule in Erie, but I don't think you mentioned that their current charter is calling for districts, despite the calls of many for proportional representation, which, you know, getting back to Kathleen's point about what are the problems that we've heard about, and, you know, I don't live there, so I don't know as much as the people who do live there who were engaged with the league, that they wanted more representation for the old town folks. And I think they're going about it the wrong way, but, you know, for whatever reasons, it was difficult to engage really with the decision makers there. So
So
sorry to see that
election
opportunity missed.
The election for Charter Commission had 18 candidates. You could vote for up to 9. The average was voting for 3 per ballot. So obviously people didn't know the candidates. They want to move the elections from April of even years to November of even years. Which has its own interesting aspects. Pat lives in Erie and weighed in. She and her husband were the only public who attended the public hearing. There was also a town trustee who attended, which is very disappointing. And I want to say that the Charter Commission has their heart in the right place. They want to do what's right, but primarily they want the charter to pass. And so they're doing what they think will pass and not necessarily what's best for the city. So that's my take on it.
It sounded like you said that it was a sad thing that a city trustee showed up at the meeting. I think you meant that only the city trustee and 2 citizens who were both friends of ours showed up.
That's
So,
what I meant.
Thanks for the updates, and thanks for running a great meeting.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Well, thank
Tell
you
your
all.
friends. We can turn off the recording, Maude.